welcome. I appreciate everyone battling through the virtual platforms and things. Apparently, I'm the only one that couldn't figure it out, but that's quite acceptable. We are about to start the meeting. Our first item of business always is a welcome and declaration. Certainly, we acknowledge with respect and gratitude that we are on the traditional and unceded land of Mi'kmaq people, and we are very grateful for the opportunity and the wonderful stewardship they have provided over the years. And we also pause in silent memory for the people that are in the unmarked graves around the residential school sites. Okay. I said we'll leave everybody's mic open, so if you have to burp or something, know that it's coming online. The declarations of conflict of interest. Does anybody come into money or anything, or property? Any changes from last time?
No wish.
Yeah, okay. Someday we will all have a hope of having a conflict of interest here for sure. Okay, approval of agenda. Can we do that by consensus?
It's Jamie, yes.
Jamie's a yes. Good. That's enough for me. That's consensus. Okay, good. Approval of.
Who else on the call?
Pardon me, Bill?
I say, who is on the call? I just see EC, CC, you, and me. That's all I can see.
No, there's a couple others. Who is on the call is Bob Gray as chair, Jamie McDonald as committee member, Paul Krant as committee member, Hannah Bell as a guest, Robin Graham as a committee member. City of Charlottetown is probably your CC, and that's Rory doing the tech for us. And Ellen Catanay. Did I say that at all right, Ellen? She's back.
It's Katani.
Okay, I had a lot of it right. Ellen Katani, who is our administrative genius that helps our committee. And also Robert Zilke is here, the city planner. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy pre-Christmas planning to join us, Robert. It's nice to see your name there. Okay, and that's who's here, Bill. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay. So approval of minutes. You have the minutes somewhere. Even I have the minutes somewhere, which is really good. These are excellent minutes, aren't they, Robin Graham?
I don't know why you're looking at me when you're the one who wrote them.
That's exactly why, Madam Secretary. So you have a pencil as well as toast today, do you?
I can grab a pencil.
That's good, because you're doing the minutes this week. You owe me. Okay. So, does somebody have a motion to approve the minutes?
I will so move.
Okay, moved by Bill, second by, thank you, Paul. You don't even have to raise your hand, Paul. I always call you. So good. Okay.
That sandwich looks good, Robin.
Okay. That's why we mute mics. But anyway, just kidding. Okay, a motion to approve the minutes. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, that's two whole ayes. We'll take that as a complete unanimous approval. Okay, and we will go to our agenda, which business arising from minutes, that's just contained in the actual business arising from minutes. Robert, I'm going to make you talk, okay? Can you tell us where we are in the process of the short-term rentals bylaw?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. We are currently completing the final report to Planning Board, which will progress to Council with a formal recommendation based on the tremendous feedback that we received. So I'm just in the midst of compiling a summary and an update, and just collating all the comments that we received during the 2 public hearings in May and this last one in November, and then as well as the tremendous amount of emails and correspondence we received from residents. So that will all be included into the next report with a formal recommendation on the proposed regulations. And then once it goes to planning board, it will then proceed to council in the
I think you're
second week of
cutting out
January.
somehow.
Oh,
Okay, yeah, I don't know, Hannah, maybe he cut out for you. We got him. So it's going to go to the planning board.
Yeah, it was cut out on my end too.
Oh, sorry,
yes,
Jamie.
that's
Okay.
Okay.
So
that's
can you
correct.
hear me? Okay. Yeah, okay. This is a classic meeting. Okay, go, Robert.
All right, so yep, it will be proceeding to planning board with a formal recommendation on the regulations with the public feedback that we received during our public outreach at the 2 consultations at the public open house, and then as well as the tremendous amount of emails we received before and following the public meeting. That is scheduled to go to planning board January 4th, so in 2 weeks from today, and then it will proceed to city council for a decision the following week in January.
Okay, so it'll go to planning. Planning board's the big one, right? In terms of sending a recommendation to council.
So we should have
Yeah.
this complete by the 15th of the month.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Okay,
So
question.
it's yeah. Do you,
Go ahead, Robert.
sorry, what did you want me, Mr. Chair? Do you want me to provide just clarification on the process?
Yeah, that's fine. Give us the 30-second version.
Sure. So, quick version is that it goes to planning board with a recommendation. Planning board can either defer the regulations, accept the regulations, or deny, recommend against the regulations. And then once that's completed, the following week it goes to City Council for approval. So Planning Board will have their recommendation whether they support our changes, or they want to see additional regulations in place, or different regulations, I should say. And then Council basically has the ability to vote on that. It has to go through 2 readings of Council, though. So council will make a decision initially the second week of January, and then hopefully in February when they meet again for their monthly meeting, they will either adopt the regulations, propose changes, or defer and send back to staff.
Okay, so
And then after that, it requires approval by the Minister of Lands and Communities.
okay, so the provincial government has a role here too. Is that kind of a rubber stamp
Correct.
thing?
Yeah. Essentially, it's basically a rubber stamp. Essentially, council, once they make a decision, the minister and their office will just review, ensure that the process was followed correctly for standard zoning bylaw amendments. There could be appeals during this time, however. If the regulations were appealed by a resident or someone in the public, then that approval would be placed on hold. So we've had a situation before where the ministers withheld approving the regulations in abeyance until IRAC makes a decision if there was an appeal.
Okay. Questions for Robert? Comments? Bill, you started off with one.
No, I just thought I was just saying that this is going to be fairly fast, and this process could be complete by the middle of January, if everything goes our way. Hello?
Through the chair to Bill. So essentially, it could be council technically has to wait till February if they were to approve the regulations, because they can't give final reading in one meeting as per the MGA. So essentially, the disposition council's disposition on the regulations should be known in the second week of January. If they have any concerns or raise any flags, they should be stating it at that time. However, they could also raise issues when it goes back for final reading in February.
Okay.
Others? Robert, if council decides that they will take that option one proposed regulation, but say grandfather everyone that's going on now, every STR that's going on now, just grandfather it in so it doesn't affect them, it's only moving forward. Is that a substantive change to the regulation, or so that I'm just wondering, will that send it back for public comment or what?
Certainly, if council was to make a decision on the grandfathering or recognizing existing STRs, whether they conform or not, that is a decision they could make. We do have a legal opinion on that, which I'm not at liberty to discuss or share. But we know certainly that council will be bringing that question forward to staff when we present the regulations to them in January. And staff have included their own analysis based on the zoning bylaw and the analysis of the bylaw on whether these commercial STRs could be grandfathered or not. I'll just share, like, since I'm writing the report, and I've been very clear throughout the whole process, there has been regulations. If someone wanted to rent out their private dwelling, their private residence as a short-term rental, it's through the home occupation provision of the zoning bylaw. These regulations have always been in place since at least 2006. And it actually goes back further to 1995, post-amalgamation bylaw. But it clearly stated that if anyone wanted to rent out their private dwelling, it had to be the principal residence, which means they have to live there, and that's the principal residence. And it was only permitted in a single detached dwelling. So a duplex, semi, apartments, none of these dwelling unit types were ever permitted or allowed to be used as a short-term rental under the home occupation provisions. So from staff's perspective, if they didn't obtain municipal approval through the home base business or home base occupation from our office, then technically it does not conform with the bylaw, since that is a requirement. And I've actually dug through some of our old permit records, and I've compiled a list and a number of tourist accommodation applications that our office has approved since 1998. So we do have a record of many of these tourist accommodation applications being processed and either approved or denied based on the regulations of the day.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, just go.
Robert, I had somebody ask me this not too long ago. It's somebody who owns a home here in Charlottetown. They have a cottage in New York or somewhere, and they wanted to know if they could rent their home out and live at the cottage. And I said I didn't think so. What do you think?
Yeah, so essentially our perspective on that is if the home is their principal residence, and we would confirm that if that's the case or not, then they would be permitted under the regulations put forward under scenario 1 to rent out their primary dwelling unit, and they could stay at a cottage. So that would not be an issue. The issue gets into if they own multiple residential properties and it's not the principal residence.
Yeah.
So the way that we confirm and check that is we go through taxation, and basically our taxation records will delineate the owner's principal residence by way of mailing their taxes. So we do have a check and balance there, but that's correct. If someone, say, had their primary dwelling in Charlottetown and they had a cottage out on the North Shore, yep, they would be permitted to rent out their principal dwelling during their time while they're staying at the cottage. That would be permitted.
Okay, I better get back to that guy then. Straighten him out on that.
Okay. Anything else for Robert before we move along? Okay. Hearing nothing, Robert, thank you very much. And you can come or go as you wish, certainly, as you can anyway. But anyway, we appreciate it very much, breaking up your day and joining us. I think I will move along now. We have made our opinions very clear in various messages to council about the short-term rental situation, and then we were looking what's our next objective and what's the next area which we're going to look at, and some of it is zoning regulations, some of it was going to be evictions and possible moratoriums and things like that. And then lo and behold, MLA Hannibal had managed to have a bill passed just in the nick of time before the House or before the Legislative Assembly rose at the end of the session. And we're very grateful, Hannah, for you being here with us. I realize you have nothing else to do, but we're very grateful. And perhaps I thought we'd have a roundtable discussion on this whole area. And perhaps you can start us off with just telling us what the bill does.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yes. So legislation is usually really complicated unless it's not. And I've managed to be successful a couple of times now with legislation that is deceptively simple. And this was one of those pieces. It's not a brand new bill. It's a piece of legislation that makes a legal change or amendment to the existing legislation. So the Rental and Residential Property Act is the current legislation that we have, which is obviously way past its sell-by date. It's the one that kind of creates most of the challenges and situations that we have. It's over 30 years old. It needs to be updated, and we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for that to happen and being delayed. I consulted with government on the draft of the new Residential Tenancy Act in December of 2019. So that's how long they've been working on the new one, and we still haven't seen it. So a lot of the things that we knew we needed to see happen around better protecting tenants are going to be in that new legislation. And therefore, a lot of the legal routes that we had to try and put changes in place kept being deferred because it was, well, that's going to be in the new legislation. But like most people who work with people in the housing area, it's been a housing crisis for, well, before I got elected, but I've been talking about the housing crisis since I got elected, so since 2018. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And the loopholes that were in there were particularly around certain types of evictions. And they are loopholes because they do allow for individuals who are not acting in good faith to be able to take advantage of the interpretation and application of the law, a lot like what we've seen with short-term rentals, funnily enough. Means that some bad actors or people acting not in good faith have been taking advantage of that, and the biggest one is rent eviction. And what rent eviction literally means is people who are being evicted out of their rented property on the subtext that they meet the requirement of, as said in the legislation, that the eviction is required because the work can't be done in the place unless the property is vacant. What actually seems to happen in the bad faith situations is that renovation may be a new coat of paint, or changing out the hardware, or something relatively minor, and then the property is then listed with a much higher rent. So it's a way of evicting out tenants who are paying a lower rent and getting a new rent. And a lot of this rests on the fact that our current rental laws require you to self-identify. There's no compliance checking. There's no proactive way to be able to sort of raise an issue or concern with our regulatory body, IRAC, or the rental office. So it's only if a tenant actually files an appeal that there's anything can happen at all. And then it's still very difficult to pursue. So we knew that people were fighting this one case at a time. It was getting worse and worse and worse. The housing crisis meant that it was getting worse in terms of the impact on where people were supposed to go. And you're right, so at the last minute we just said, okay, clearly the government is not going to table this legislation. Despite the promises it was coming, we have to do something. We can't wait another 6 months and see another winter of people being evicted with nowhere to go. So all that being said, I wrote this piece of legislation in about 3 hours. I talked a whole bunch of people into letting me get it through processes that are supposed to usually take about 6 months. It is a very simple piece, and what it does is it restricts the ability for people to be able to evict on the basis of renovation. And as a result, despite the fact that it was somewhat watered down on the floor by government, it immediately meant that 162 active files that were in progress with the rental office or IRAC were halted. So there were 162 active files where people were in the process of being evicted that immediately stopped as soon as this legislation was passed on the 17th of November. And it buys time.
Okay. Anything else right now, Hannah, or we'll just open it up to questions?
No, I'm happy to answer questions. Unfortunately, I do know this legislation, the original piece and the new one, really well. I can talk a lot about it in detail, which is not necessarily super exciting, but I also I know how it works and where the gaps are and sort of what that looks like. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have, whether it's about how and why, or just how does this work, or what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about next. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Okay, we'll have an open floor, and we'll do it as if we're in the same room. Okay, mic's open. Just shout, and if you talk louder than the other person, you may win.
Then I'll talk at once.
I don't know question or not, Hannah, but I just want to thank you for that. For being on the ball and getting that through. I just know from King Square nonprofit housing perspective, we get an awful lot of calls. That was a real problem, a real issue for us. People getting evicted, and for the reasons you just stated. And that moratorium is really, really going to help. I just hope it somehow or other it's a win-win situation in the end for everybody, but I don't know how it's going to be at this point. Yeah. Yeah,
and so the moratorium with this case, I mean, there were, I heard a lot in the first couple of days, a lot of very angry landlords, and people who didn't understand the context of it as well, because the headlines, people read the headlines and don't get the detail, and a lot of people in the industry don't know the details of how the law works either, which is, it's fair, it's complicated. There are multiple reasons why people can be evicted, and we haven't addressed the primary, this doesn't take away a landlord's right to evict somebody because they haven't paid their rent, or because they're disruptive, or, so landlords still have that protection of being able to evict somebody for due cause. What it does is it addresses the challenge that had been demonstrated over and over again, where there was an area that people were being taken advantage of, and that there was no kind of legal repercussions. So it closes that door. And it doesn't prevent people from doing renovations. So, landlords can still do renovations. They have to be really clear whether the tenant actually needs to leave. So, as we all know.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have tenants, we'll call it the Hillsborough Village debacle. Some of those people were King Square clients, we'll say.
Yep. Yeah, no, I know, yeah.
Yeah, you would, right? Yeah. Anyway, that really drew me into it quickly, because I had tenants that were involved in that.
Yeah, and so that's what I said. That was one of the pieces that we put in the legislation. Was it wasn't just sort of from a going forward basis, because we knew how many cases were in progress. Some of them had been going for months. So we also wanted to make it. It's hard sometimes to make legislation retroactive, but this one we were able to do it by saying anything where the file had not yet been closed. So if it was still an active file in any process of the appeal or whatever, then it basically froze all of it, which is how it was able to affect so many. as I said, it doesn't take away the landlord's ability to do renovations. It actually doesn't even take away a landlord's ability to still do a complete renovation on the building if they buy something that needs to be ripped down to the studs, or it has, you know, a health and safety issue or whatever, which is fine. They have to have the building permits, and they have to prove they're actually doing that work, and that's what was missing before. When you ask someone to act in good faith, you're basically saying, I trust you to be doing the right thing, and unfortunately, when for some that meant that they realized that they weren't being asked to prove that they were actually going to do the work they said they were going to do. Now they have to, and that in itself is and that's the kind of thing we need to see in the new legislation. So this moratorium will remain in place either for 2 years or until the new legislation comes forward that should have a similar type of clause in it.
Do you know if the proposed new legislation for that act, will that have a similar clause?
So the draft that I worked on, Bob, does. The challenge is I don't know what changes have been made since that initial draft. So that draft that I helped put straight initially, and then that was put out for public consultation, had a very strong piece around. It took away the requirement for good faith, and it basically said, here's exactly what is and is not allowed. And one of the things that we wanted to see in there was that if somebody was going to be evicted for a renovation, they had first right of refusal to go back to that apartment afterwards. So it changes the dialogue around somebody being kicked out, you know, because it means that there has to be oversight on what was the rent before, what work has been done, what is the new rent that reflects the law, you know, and then that the person who was evicted is out of their home only temporarily, and that they have to have some temporary accommodation provided. Like if you're going to be out of your home for a renovation, the landlord can't make that permanent unless you choose to leave. So it's not a reason to evict somebody. It's a temporary change of housing, which is how actually the model is used in many other jurisdictions in Canada. So that's not a new idea at all.
Yeah, it's really upset an awful lot of people that I know anyway.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, like the current Residential Property Act is 36 years old, I think. I mean, and this is the way it's been for a long time. So, you know, I mean, the core of the new legislation is that it is not a tenant-only legislation, because a lot of people got upset because of the name, that it's the Residential Tenancy Act, but it is literally setting out the rules around how residential tenants can engage. But it reflects the requirements for landlords and tenants, and it includes a lot of things that protect landlords, like makes it easier for them to deal with a difficult tenant, for example, because right now that can be really hard. So there's a lot of provisions in there, but what it does is it recognizes the power imbalance that exists between tenants and landlords, and says, you know, when you've got somebody on one side who is making money, and on the other side you've got somebody who needs housing, then at the core of that you have a power imbalance, and you have to be able to reflect something that provides protection to both that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Right. So protecting the investment of the landlord is absolutely appropriate. It's not fair to have somebody in a property where they're losing their investment because somebody's damaging their space or they're not getting paid. But from the other side, a landlord.
Anyway, King Square really appreciates what you did. I just want you to know that it's really appreciated.
Thank you, Bill.
I think all of us do. More comments for Hannah.
I just want to say, like, whenever that happened, I was literally so happy because I don't know if you can tell, but my apartment's half finished, and it's always been that way. And I was always too scared to be like, can you fix this? But now I've been messaging my landlord like once a month and being like, hey, here's your list of stuff to fix. Like, can you fix it, or I'll buy it and you reimburse me? And I'm not scared of being evicted, and now I have smoke detectors.
That's amazing.
Good.
Yeah. That's the power imbalance, right? Like that's it. I mean, it's really frightening because you don't have the any leverage. as a tenant when that's hanging over your head all the time.
That's beer, is it, Robin?
No, it's Diet Pepsi. But yeah, my apartment's been unfinished for 5 years, and like, there's always been dangerous things, and I've just brought up like the most dangerous because I was always like, well, my rent hasn't changed since 2012, so if I bring up all these things, then I'm just gonna get evicted. And it was always like this weird balance, but now I'm kind of like, okay, I'm good, like for at least like 2 years, but it's a lot less scary. And also Connor from Fight for Affordable Housing, I can just like picture how relieved he is because all he was dealing with was rent evictions.
I'll get it later. No,
And,
sorry.
like,
Go ahead.
that's okay. All he was dealing with was rent evictions, and that leaves no space for anything else.
Yeah.
So as soon as that happened, I was like, this is so good for like so many other reasons other than just keeping people from being homeless. Like now people can message their landlord with a little less fear, and Connor and people like Connor and activists and stuff have more energy and time because they don't have to fight this all the time. But yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, well, the month that the Hillsborough Park group got made, that which was the single largest group that I've had to deal with, I had 56 files for rent eviction that month, just in Charlottetown, and so that's between my district, District 9, District 12, and they all came in within 1 week. It was just absolutely overwhelming, and all but 6 of them were halted with the legislation. But but like the volume. This was the primary way that people were being moved out of their homes, and from the short-term rental side of it, this started then with the house flipping piece, but it accelerated as we see more and more investment groups buying up properties. That's kind of the next wave of this. It's mid-sized investment groups purchasing multiple properties and then turning them over. So
is there a scramble now to buy and establish short-term rentals, trying to beat the legislation? Do we know anything about that?
We haven't seen that as much, certainly in the Charlottetown area from my district.
Just Charlottetown.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is, like I said, there's these kind of what we would call mid-sized investment groups. So we're familiar with the real estate investment groups, the really large ones that were, like Killam and that kind of piece. But there's these mid-sized ones that have multiple investors who are purchasing smaller, diverse properties, and then looking for the lowest rent. So usually the people who've been there the longest are paying the lowest rent because of the way the rent escalations work, and evicting them and then flipping the properties over so to get them back on the market with a higher rent. So the investment group that bought the properties in Hillsborough Park has about 100 properties across Charlottetown and Stratford, and all purchased within the last 2 years. And there are multiple of these size groups, and that's what we're seeing happening now. They're buying smaller apartment buildings, duplexes, even single family homes, and running them as an investment trust.
Hannah, I should know this, I guess, but is there any provisions at all for grandfathering any of the older STR established businesses in town? I guess not, In the legislation, I don't know. Somebody asked me that.
Short-term rentals don't appear at all in the rental Residential Properties Act. There's no reference about the usage. There are minimum requirements in terms of like the square footage of an apartment and like access and safety. So those kind of regulations can be applicable, and we've run across those as a challenge when we look at things like micro units, or where an apartment is subdivided up into really, really small units. It becomes a challenge then because they may not meet the code or safety requirements, to Robin's point about fires, smoke detectors and things. But there's nothing specifically about usage. So that is under, either provincial under the Tourism Act or municipal, as you spoke to with Robert. So no, that would come under usage rather than kind of a rental agreement type thing.
you.
Jamie, your turn. Just
Sorry, I'm driving on my way to another meeting, but I'm pulled over. I just want to say thank you. That was very informative and great information. And I may have missed it, Hannah, just intermittent reception. But did you give a timeline or approximate timeline as to some of the work and when that's moving forward? I mean, I know there's a moratorium right now, which is great, but was there more specifics on the timelines?
So the moratorium has 2 years from the date of enactment, which was November 17th. So it'd be to the end of November 2023, or when the new Residential Tenancy Act is enacted. So we don't know when that's going to be tabled. It might be this coming spring. We will. I honestly don't know because we're not. It's coming from government, and we're not. We usually get informed when the public does. We don't usually get much heads up. Even if that legislation does come forward this spring, it would also require regulations as well. So I don't think that's actually going to come into force until 2023 either. So we're going to look at potentially some more interim legislation in the meantime to fill other gaps, which is what I'm looking at next, is sort of what else might we need to do. But the short answer is this moratorium will be at least in place until 2023 either way.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great information.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Paul?
How you doing, Hannah?
I'm good. Paul, how are you?
Good.
Very cash.
What are some of the gaps that you guys will be focusing on over the next? You said in the interim until the Residential Tenancy Act gets implemented. What are some of the gaps that you see that can be filled in the short term?
Some of them are more policy, like where we can put pressure on. Obviously, we're limited, as opposition. We managed to get a lot done, regardless, as you've seen. Like a lot of that is honestly, it's a lot of negotiation behind the scenes, and whenever we get legislation through, it's because we've talked everybody else into it, or there's been a battle on the floor or off the floor. So legislation is really hard when you're not government. So a lot of it is where can we put pressure on in other ways as well. Probably one of the biggest challenges is the role of IRAC and the role of the rental office. So one of the pieces that we see, and I think Robin mentioned it around Connor and his role, he's filling in like the Fight for Affordable Housing and the Tenant Advisor are filling a really essential gap, because people who are trying to battle to save their housing, or landlords too, don't have any access to legal aid. You need a lawyer. You need some kind of legal advice to be able to get through this process. Like doing an appeal with IRA is terrifying and complicated. So having Connor being able to help people even just prepare for a hearing has been huge. But like the number of people who don't do it because it's so scary, or they don't understand it, or they don't know how to navigate it, and so they get evicted anyway. That's been the case over and over again. So there's a couple of things we're fighting for. One of them is to expand legal aid, so it includes providing support for people who are having to appeal through the housing board. Another one would be to the rental registry, to actually make that a real thing, because it empowers people. Like right now, IRAC doesn't get involved until you appeal. They don't keep track of anything. So the only way we know when somebody's rent is raised illegally is because the public keep track of it themselves with Public Rental Registry, which is a volunteer project. We got agreement from government 2 years ago that the rental registry should be part of the function of IRAC, and nothing yet. I mean, and it's not expensive to do. It's a manpower thing. We need more transparency in the decisions and the record keeping that's coming in and out of that rental office, so that we can get a better picture, because a lot of the data that we have, we kind of pull it all together from all these different places. So the numbers and the information that we have is coming from the community. And honestly, it's really tiring continually having to convince government that this is real. You know, like when I sit on the floor of the legislation, I'm having to explain to people who should know better that renovation is a real thing. At this, you know, like you kind of wonder, what am I supposed, like, how is this possible that today you don't know what this is? And that's part of the story. Like, you know, is having that information, having that data. So those are things that we can really push for that aren't legislation. Because by putting us into public space and having that conversation publicly, so it's not just me being crazy standing on a box yelling about stuff, but the more people talk about that stuff, the more we move it into the day. Same as we had to do with homelessness, right? Like, you know, when we first started talking about homelessness as a real crisis in Charlottetown, people said we were lying. You know, when I first stood up in the House and talked about there being tents, like, I was called a liar. And it's really difficult for people in privilege to understand that this is actually true.
We were going to have Connor. We were going to invite Connor to join us today, but he went home for Christmas up to Ontario to spend it with his family. And if we'd known that we were going to be doing WebEx, he still could have. But we'll invite him after the new year starts.
Yeah.
He'll join us too.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just so difficult.
Paul, anything else, Paul?
No, I'm just wondering, and maybe Hannah can't answer this when she doesn't. Anyways, I'm just saying that what does she think that we can do as a committee to improve the situation? We're an advisory committee to the planning committee, I guess, and
yeah.
And so,
I think you know, just like having the advisory committee be so clear about the position that it takes has been hugely powerful. Like having Bob as the chair speak at the short-term rental public meeting about the position of the committee, that was absolutely, there was no gray, and that's really powerful.
Is that a pun?
But you know, and so continuing to make those clear positional statements, and providing that clear direction, because you know the planning committee has, you know, you're advising them and you're giving them, here's what, you know, here's a position, and there's a lot of power in that. For the public as well to feel that somebody who has influence is listening and is amplifying. So you know that focus and amplification on the short-term rental piece. You know, what's the next thing, or what are the other things? You know, so whether that's from a planning perspective, whether it's that we need to be fighting for more resources in Charlottetown that are about providing. We need to provide more housing actually in Charlottetown. You know, like you know, Bill and I have talked about this before. Like we don't warehouse people out in, you know, the industrial park or somewhere in the middle of, you know, wherever. Charlottetown is a vibrant community if people live in it, and that means all sorts of people, and it may mean people who aren't the people you normally hang out with, and that's okay, right? Like that. I think one of the ways we challenge and tackle our housing crisis here is we actually start to talk about more proper housing development in the city of Charlottetown, and that means thinking about zoning changes, density changes, relaxing parking requirements, like those kind of things. And that also needs to be, we actually need to have a clear definition of what affordable is. Affordable is not $1,200 a month, right? And so one of the best things that the committee could do is sort of get Charlottetown to commit to an actual clear definition of affordable, and then connect its funding to that.
can you repeat that, because you were cutting in and out?
One of the most powerful things I think the committee could do is make a clear definition of affordable, what affordable housing actually is, and then require or suggest that the city connect its housing funding, which it can get and should be applying for, to that definition. The city
Social housing.
is leaving money on the table because there are significant federal funds that the city can and should be applying for through CMHC, and they don't, because they can't get their shit together and decide what affordable housing is.
The CMHC threshold hasn't been changed, as far as I know, for at least 2 or 3 years. It's way out of kilter with with what's actually happening in Charlottetown.
Yeah, but I mean, if Charlottetown doesn't have a clear statement about its commitment to building or creating, it doesn't mean build, it can be renovate, but create housing in the downtown core, in Charlottetown, that is affordable and mixed use, you're leaving people and opportunity behind. That's my pitch.
There may be opportunities for some of these empty office buildings that you can't fill up because of COVID and for various other reasons, that you may be able to put, some form of social housing in part of the building.
That's right. Some of the most flexible money that CMHC does have available has been, we're hoping they're going to do it again. It was under the Rapid Housing Initiative, and that was specifically to repurpose existing properties for new use. And that's exactly what Montreal and Toronto did with it. Was they actually renovated a warehouse and an office building into micro apartments. And that money was 90% federal, and it was the least restrictive funds I've ever seen, and we didn't even apply. But we have 120,000 square feet of empty office space in downtown Charlottetown. A lot of space.
So as a committee, we would urge the city to establish a definition, which we would frame for them as a starting point, and then apply for.
Yeah, I mean, and Bill's right. Like CMHC aren't like he's the one that knows the guidelines and stuff on this better than I do, because I don't actually do applications. I just complain about them.
In your definition, what you have to do is, if we're going to do this, we have to set a threshold, okay?
Yeah.
What is unacceptable, or what is acceptable, and then you have to say 30%. Nobody pays more than 30%. All the stuff I'm doing now is 25%, but I'm hearing a lot of 30% lately.
Yeah.
30% of their income with reasonable thresholds. Now, what I've been doing, I don't know, hope there's nobody on CMHC listening, but anyway, what I've been doing lately is setting my own thresholds, like, say, for a single person looking for an apartment in Charlottetown right now, I will allow them a subsidy up to $1,200. And even that's not enough. But you should see the thresholds the CMHC have. They're a lot less than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I found though is that you can generally, CMHC don't have management oversight after the project goes, so you can have that flexibility that Bill has. I mean, but I do think that definition, I think shifting the conversation around, if the market determines what affordable is, it will never be affordable, right? So the affordable is based on your income. And the catch to that is that somebody has to manage that, right? But we have organizations in place to do that. We have King Square Housing. We have the PEI Housing Corporation, which is
it's just unbelievable. And Iraq is another big peeve with me. Maybe this is the wrong place to talk about that, but I just went through something recently where we have a special building. We call it a crisis center, and in that crisis center, people are allowed to stay up to 12 months. So we had a family move in there, and their 12 months were up. They refused to leave. So we evicted them, or tried to, and they appealed it. They went to Iraq. We hired a lawyer. Everything. Geez, we lost the case. Iraq is beyond me right now. I don't know. I have to be careful. My next door neighbor is Scott McKinsey. Not good for public relations.
Well, we've had cases with Iraq where we found out that they're using the rather than using the assessed property value of the building to determine a reasonable rate of return, which is a landlord can request.
Yeah.
They're using a real estate assessed value. So basically, what somebody made up last week, and it's been a real problem because it's literally make up your number.
It's just it's so frustrating because then here we have one, people coming in and they got no place really nice to go. This place is a really wonderful place to live, and they want to stay there forever once they get in there. But it's a crisis center, and so what happens is their 12 months is up, and now they can come to us and say, "Well, what about so and so? We can't kick so and so out because they won the IRAC case." Anyway, maybe I'm a little off topic. I'm sorry.
So Family Violence Prevention Services, which has Anderson House, which is housing for women and families escaping family violence, they also have, they have emergency shelter, and then they have longer term and families transition into, and they've got the same problem. They've got people who basically are stuck in the transitional housing because they can't find any apartments they can afford to move them into, which means then people in the shelter can't go to the transitional, which means they can't take new clients. So, I mean, we have a cascade across the whole continuum. And the city has a responsibility to be a more effective partner to be a more effective partner, basically. They need to be a more effective partner.
Okay, I think we will
can I provide some excuse me, Bob, can I provide some clarification for the committee?
Please do.
Okay, so just providing clarification, the City of Charlottetown zoning development bylaw does provide a definition of affordable housing, and I'll just read it for you right now. Affordable housing means any type of housing whereby the provincial government provides some form of subsidy or rent assistance, including public, non-profit, cooperative housing, or rent supplements for people living in the private market housing. Since 2018, the city has maintained an affordable housing incentive program, which was just updated and revised this past July to include and define affordable housing as, again, provincially subsidized, which I believe they use 25% of someone's income. And they also have a list of residents that are on a housing needs list. So some of the benefits that we provide, and again, this is in the zoning bylaw, is bonus density, parking reductions. We actually pay them back building permit fees for every unit that's affordable. And we also have a tax incentive program where property taxes are deferred for a number of years based on the value of construction for those affordable units. And to date, we have 3 contracts between private development and PI Housing Corporation signed where there's affordable units mixed in with market rate units. So those are just some of the incentives and some of the actions that the city has been taking, working in conjunction with the province on affordable housing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I appreciate that, Robert. I think we've got a lot of food for thought and a lot of what's the metaphor? Grist for our mill after Christmas, after New Year's. Very grateful for you coming and having a chat with us, Hannah. Anytime you want to join one of our meetings, I'm sure we're open. And before we wrap up, I would very much like to thank Ellen and Robert for joining us, and also Rory for handling the IT and the WebEx for us. And for everyone on the committee, I would have a huge thank you for all your work so far this year. We started in May, and I think we've accomplished a lot. And I've been very grateful to every member of the committee for your contributions. And I think we are making a bit of a difference, and I think we will continue to make. And I'd like to wish you all the very best Christmas. And the official rule for our committee is you cannot get out of bed on Christmas morning before 5 a.m. So we will find out. There will be a fine system. So Merry Christmas to everyone, and to all a good day.
Merry Christmas to you, Bob.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Merry Christmas.